Hi, thanks for tuning in to our Practical Nerds weekly podcast. I'm Shubh, and together with my partner and co host Patrick, we normally invest in founders in design, construction, renovation, and logistics technology. Many of our friends in the ecosystem wanted us to start a podcast on the built world, and in return, we decided to honor their request with a show about nothing at all.
Back after a week's break, Patrick. Um,
Nice.
yeah, hopefully with something that keeps us from disagreeing with each other.
Yeah, again, a whole lot of nothing with you.
Wouldn't expect anything more from you.
Nice. So what are the topics we have on the docket for this week?
So it seems like we have three topics. One of which, in fact, is sort of a continuation from, I guess, a bit of a cliffhanger I offered right at the end of our previous
That's right.
episode. So the theme of, I guess we've been talking a lot about upskilling people and the workforce, but could there be an opportunity in upskilling factories or manufacturing facilities? So
Especially building materials factories.
exactly, right? There could also be an opportunity, and I think you have recently just published a very interesting post, a lot of very interesting information there, Patrick, on a very interesting and a wild card opportunity. The pun is very deliberate on the wild over there, right? on perhaps a private firefighting force, right, to respond
Hmm.
to, amongst many other things, the rising threat of wildfires that we're seeing in many parts of the world now, right? And I guess since we are VCs and we are big fans of VC 101, and we, for some reason, all this while we haven't talked about climate investing and what that
Ah,
represents, right? I don't know why it took us this many episodes, but I guess we might as well finally cover it.
we were
Uh,
too much caught up in AI.
oh yeah, I mean for good reason, because obviously it's our favorite topic, right?
Right.
But
Okay, so the
maybe
three topics are upskilling, building materials factories, this crazy tech-enabled firefighting opportunity to save the built world from inferno, and then our hot takes on climate investing. So that's the three
yeah,
topics, right? So, so yeah, Shub, indeed, we ended the last show on this cliffhanger where you were, I was asking you, hey, what meeting do you look forward to in your calendar? And you said, hey, I'm meeting this very interesting company that is upskilling factories. I said, huh? Like, how does that work? So, and then the show was over. So I'm picking up at my huh. And so, how
yeah.
does that work, Shub?
Yeah, so it's quite interesting. I think so. We have looked at a couple of firms in this space. I must call out one that seems to be a bit further ahead of the other. The idea being that there's a lot of factories. I mean, the opportunities we have looked at are in India, but in theory, presumably a similar opportunity could exist in a few other emerging markets, which are positioning themselves more either for increased exports or for greater factory production. But the idea is there is a critical mass of factories which are producing to a certain, based on a certain level of asset utilization, based on certain demand that they work with currently, and perhaps with low quality inputs, less predictable, less reliable access to energy, outdated processes on how they plan their batches batch their production, and maybe have not a clue in the world on how to market their products or access better clients or better paying clients, just to be clear, right? And in
Hmm.
many of these contexts, what we mean by better paying clients could be as binary as just whether they get to export or not. And so the interesting thing is, so there's perhaps an opportunity where you could bridge access to materials, access to energy, provide access to exports in a way where the company, imagine a net importer of materials, of certain kinds of materials from other emerging markets. And you know this, Patrick. I believe we had this discussion earlier on Practical Nerds as well. Europe, for example, would impose very strict quality standards
Hmm.
on especially certain finishing materials that it would
Yeah, we
choose to.
love our documents and forms here.
Exactly, right? So if a certain exporter is deemed to not meet those quality standards, it's not the discussion doesn't proceed any further. It's very binary in that sense. You don't get access to the market.
Hmm.
So there is potentially an argument to be made that if you just manage to level yourself up to meet those quality standards, which could be a result of several things, by the way, you open up access to a new market, which increases your revenue potential tremendously, right?
So help me. Frame this for me. Like, what size of factories would this be? Like, paint a picture for me.
So, on average, this would be a factory generating an output, that, as in the value of the goods manufactured by the factory, would be in the range of give or take $3 to $5 million a year. So,
Okay,
this is what we would
I
call a
guess could
small
be
factory.
more, but that's like a broad base of what you're
Yeah.
serving
So,
with it.
if
Okay,
you had to take a range, I would say a 95 percentile range would probably be, I don't know, say 500K to 10 million
interesting. Okay,
annual output, right?
okay,
But again, interesting to how what we've generally observed in the construction industry, all these small factories would collectively perhaps form the bulk of the output in that market. So even though on a unit basis it looks small and difficult to serve, it's a problem shared by a very significant number of factories.
so potentially super repeatable.
Exactly.
Got
Exactly.
it. And so when I walk in this factory, like, what do I see? Like what? I mean, paint a picture.
So again, you may be when I use the word factory, you may not be prepared for what you might see. It may be a much smaller unit than you expect. A lot of them will probably look about the size of a typical house, right?
Hmm.
And a lot of them will operate. So even though there'll be a kiln or a heated furnace, it'll probably be a very small one, right? Which is so that same unit, which is the size of a house, will have a unit for a furnace, have a unit for batch storage of raw materials or inputs, also for holding on to inventory of finished goods. The staff, which is usually just the owning family and maybe a little bit of operational staff, all sort of housed together. So that's the
Got
sort
it.
of setup you're talking about.
Got it.
Yeah.
Nice, nice. And so, what kinds of, I guess, building materials categories would be fit for upskilling? You think?
So I think if you look at it from a very top-down analysis, it would have to be a product or a category where quality somehow creates an aspect of pricing or weighs in very dramatically on pricing. So it
Hmm.
automatically eliminates big structural materials like cement and steel. It also, to a significant degree, removes non-commodity materials, which where their price doesn't change that dramatically. I would imagine, for example, bricks would not belong here. But I
Hmm.
would imagine what we generally refer to as finishing materials, that would be tiles, ceramic based sanitary ware, lots of wood, for example, I think could also belong in a category like that, although wood doesn't come from a factory. But just to give you an example of if there was to be an analogous factory for wood treatment, that would belong in that sort of framework. Um, Stones like marble granite definitely belong here. Again, with marble granite, you don't take them into a furnace, but there's still a production facility which nevertheless cuts and treats and handles the stone and the
Hmm.
material.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
Oh,
And
interesting.
with each of these, the price you can extract varies quite dramatically. I think, I mean, there's a completely different point, but I think in one of our episodes, you had made a point about how there's an enormous markup with lighting products.
Right.
That may not, the extent of a markup or price differential may not be as acute in some of these product categories that I mentioned, but it is still immense. That immense to the point where even though you would have lots of middle layers in between, each of them can pocket a decent margin in a
Right.
cross-border supply chain.
Okay, got it. I mean, it's fascinating, right? The never think about it from a Western perspective that you can upskill, non-people
Yeah.
elements, but a factory is, if you think about it, it is a living organism because it consists of so many moving parts that have to go right in order for you to extract higher margins, also higher revenues, and so that's to me quite fascinating. I guess what are the biggest levers that you're seeing in the upskilling? Is it the procurement, or is it organizing the shop floor differently? Is it the distribution and sales channels? I mean, even the logistics of it, like or all of the above.
I mean, I'm very tempted, as I always am in these situations, to answer all of the above.
Uh-huh.
I think so. Again, this may be a concept hard for a Western audience to grasp, but the idea is so. Just as it would be in the case of an individual, the idea is for an individual to hopefully successfully make the transition from a student or a dependent person to a qualified professional. And maybe it takes, in the case of certain individuals, all it takes is a formal program. In the case of certain individuals, you may need to go through a training. So similarly here, the idea is to take it from a small family-owned sort of cobbled together setup, which sort of does things in an ad hoc way, where you get your demand in an ad hoc way from your limited sphere of contacts. You get your supply from, again, in an ad hoc way with
I
limited
see.
sphere of contacts, to how that can evolve into a professional firm where you're not just selling to whoever is in front of you, you're selling to whoever is best able to value your output. You're not procuring from whoever is right in front of you, you're procuring from whoever is the most reliable and offers consistent input.
But
And I think,
so just
yeah,
just to be clear, this is what you're describing, and the company you're excited about. They are not rolling up these factories. They are not acquiring them and restructuring them. This is
no.
completely hands-off customer-supplier relationship.
Correct. I mean, the one example I thought of, it's a very crude and highly oversimplified example. It is what, say, a McDonald's or a Subway would do to, say, a mom and pop setup and say, hey, you know what? You run the show over here, but we'll give you all the input raw materials, the food products. We'll teach you how to prepare each sandwich. We'll brand it as well so that the trust and the mind recall is sorted, and you carry on. You nevertheless
Got
own the
it.
whole operation and you run the business.
Got it. Okay. Fascinating. It's almost so in that sense, it would always be a private equity play
Hmm.
without the capital required for private equity. So you're basically helping a lot of these owners stay in ownership and
Hmm.
and continue running the family business, but you elevate them by giving them more structure and more repeatability, or
Yeah.
more access to structure and access to repeatability, I should say.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so that way you're almost rolling them up under one almost umbrella without having
Hmm.
to have the capital of a private equity roll up. That's what
That
it
is
sounds like
indeed
to me.
what I guess in an ideal world, the vision in my mind ought to be. And I think at that point it becomes a very powerful vision. It's not easy to execute, as I think the more we discuss and realize it, there's complexities involved, but if achieved, it is a powerful vision.
And could this, like, for these building materials categories, like what's the role of domestic demand and export demand? Can it work only with one of the two, or how do you view that?
So again, so there's no reason why you can't find an equilibrium with both domestic and export. Now, in a real-time situation, what this would mean is what you're hoping for is, as the emerging market economies, the domestic incomes rise, there you still and let, for the sake of argument, let's say the top 10% of the domestic buyers have a purchasing power comparable to what your export buyers buy.
Okay.
So that what you could then represent is, as the market rises, if you go through, let's call it this qualification program, right? Or this upskilling program, you now, even though you may, for example, sell 50% to export and 50% to domestic, perhaps the 50% of domestic is still coming from the top layer, which is willing to pay. And I guess the way to think of this is, for instance, in most markets, if you are in the elite 1% of the workforce, you'll generally do well, regardless of
Yeah.
what the purchasing power of that local economy is. So the ambition, therefore, is you become like one of the top manufacturers where you're no longer beholden to the law of averages. You just become like a preferred supplier to
Got
the
it.
one who pays the best.
I mean, another way to think of it is you're earning your seat at the table.
Yeah.
Is where the table is, the table that is paying for your product the most.
Hmm.
And because you secure high quality input materials, but also at preferential terms, because
Yeah.
it's almost in European economies. I have to ask Adam, but I'm pretty sure it also exists in the US. You have these group buying for a lot of like the construction trades,
Hmm.
where mid-sized companies, small-sized companies, they band together and that way extract favorable purchasing terms, more favorable than if they were all on their own. There's also some more shady practices around that, but historically it's I think been a general success, and that's also what this is, right? So you're becoming part of this group buying experience.
Yeah. Exactly.
Very interesting. And I mean, you invested very early in Inframarket, now the most valuable private construction tech company in the world, according to our knowledge. Still private, I should say, still private
Yeah.
construction tech company. Does it remind you of that journey in some ways? I mean, there's no like for like. I know that, like
Yeah.
that doesn't exist. But in what ways does it remind you of it?
So again, hard to make the comparison. I think each company, it's so different, and I think has its unique footprint of strengths and weaknesses. I think the similarity is, even though it may not seem like it, even in infra market, even though in its early days it was primarily on cement, aggregates, fly ash, etc., and a little bit of concrete there as well, which on the surface mostly sound like commodities and materials where there's hardly any pricing power or maybe no pricing power. It still ultimately came down to being a very reliable brand, that if you order for something, it shows up when you want it and you're not left high and dry. And even though, if I'm not mistaken, some of their early clients, in fact, used it as a sort of, hey, we've suddenly had this additional demand or this unplanned event because of which we now need to procure some more material. Where do we quickly get it from? And Inframarket sort of stepped in to solve this sort of thing. And you sort of, this goes back to one of our earlier discussions on service rich or solving for needs, right? And doing whatever it takes to actually solve the need. And once you represent that, hey, you know what, when I'm in a sticky situation, in this case Inframarket was there, I can now trust this brand, and it therefore stands for reliability, which, as we've since piggybacked off of that brand, we've also extended to mean high quality, as we've used with
Right.
private labels and so on. So I think to that extent, the larger vision, perhaps there's overlaps with what reliability, quality, trust, etc., means and how it can apply to certain models. And in that sense, there may be some semblance of an overlap.
Oh, interesting. Okay. I
Yeah.
can see that. I mean, it wouldn't be it wouldn't be something that I would think of in most of the Western markets that I'm aware of. We do have SMB factories.
Hmm.
Take metal, the metal processing supply chain, for example. Um, but I think generally the quality and the reliability in most of the old school Western markets even apply to the smallest of these shops. And so
Hmm.
that takes away the value proposition of, hey, I'm actually going to help you elevate the quality to the minimum standard required in order to do business with, whatever this upper echelon of customer.
Hmm.
And the group buying, for example, the benefits of participating in cheaper energy purchasing or whatever input material you need, partially fixed, not tech enabled. But on the other hand, what the Western markets really are starved for is high quality non-domestic supply, because the domestic supply that is branded, let's be real, they produce in the same countries in
Yeah.
many ways.
Yeah.
Could be Central Eastern Europe, could be Turkey, so it's not necessarily exactly the same country, but the same type of methodology applies, but they slap a brand on it,
Yeah.
and then it's not necessarily available tomorrow. So
Yeah.
the ability to actually source high quality new material pools, I can see that being in high demand in the Western markets for a proposition like this, where you upskill those factories.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think it'll be quite interesting to see how this plays out. Um, could be an interesting theme, even for. I wonder if it goes to the extent of just like how wherever you go to a McDonald's, you know what you're getting. I wonder
Yeah.
if it could
Oh yeah, I
extend
know
to
what I'm
that
getting.
sort of a format. I know, I know, I know exactly what you mean.
That's why I'm not going. Yes. Okay. Yeah, nice. And what I like, I mean, before we close on this one and move on, but what I find fascinating about this upskilling factories topic that you brought was that, so we've been monitoring the cross-border space, not since yesterday. Like that's been on our mind for more than 3 years. In fact, you were the earliest investor in a company called Zwork. Look it up. They were probably the category creator in the tech-enabled space here. So you brought this also into Fundamental, and we've been aware. But what's different here is that you actually start with a factory and you level them up. While most of
Yeah,
the cross-border sourcing models, they don't work on the factory shop floor and on the upstream side. They just work on the sourcing and distribution.
correct. Yeah,
No, very interesting. And I mean, it applies to so many building materials categories. It's just a super fragmented supply side.
yeah, correct. But hey, I mean, staying on the topic of reliability and quality, I think you had a very interesting analysis on a wholly different opportunity.
I wouldn't call it an analysis. It's maybe more hypothesizing. But thanks for branding it that way. But so I don't want to use wildfires as triggers, because quite frankly, it doesn't do justice for the poor people that are affected by wildfires. I think we can even have a more macro sense of wildfires. Is when I ran the numbers from the Firefighter Association in North America. They are very organized with their statistics, and so what you see is that in 2013, between 2013 to 2022, we saw an annual increase of 45% more fires per year and 75% more acreage burned in wildfires per year. So this is not for me triggered by any specific wildfire. It's a clear trend that we're seeing in this world. The same happens in Australia at the Amazon. It happens in southern
Yeah,
Europe. It happens in many places, right? And so this is a universal problem. But so what I started thinking about is, so this is a very built world problem, because what gets ruined in this is not just forests, it's actually infrastructure, it's homes, it's people's livelihoods. So the physical real world gets affected, aside from the climate problem. But so we're covering the built world. That's why I think about this as well. And so when you think about that, at some point I wondered about this almost analogy of where failed public services were replaced by tech-enabled private services. So consider 3 spaces that fit that. There's so this was now an unintended pun. So there's space travel and bringing mankind into space. There is defense, and there's healthcare. In space, I think it's been evident and now well documented that administrators have called NASA a failure after 2000, maybe up until, I don't know, 15 years later, where they didn't quite, make enough progress in terms of the space race. And it was SpaceX, it was Blue Origin, it was more recently ESAR Aerospace, and many others that actually did all the innovation, tech enablement, etc., to bring mankind into space, right? And I'm going to come back to what that means for me. But so that's one. Healthcare, take this one, right? So I mean, public healthcare is failing all over the place in many in many markets, be it emerging, be it mature, it's just not working. It's too slow moving. It's not tech adopting. Let's leave out small countries that actually get to fix that, like the Nordics or the Baltics. So they actually have a better track record at adopting technology. But even there, I would argue it's probably, it can still do better. But if you look at the big markets, it's failing in adapting to an aging population and adopting technology to actually do better. And the same in defense. If you look at every war and every battlefield around the planet, you see technology, but what you also see is private military corps. So think about what that could mean for disaster response, and wildfires being one of the most devastating disasters among others as an example. And so what that could mean in my mind is that, hey, probably our disaster response forces are going to have a talent problem because it's a very unsafe job. It's one of these jobs where you're bored, and then what the fuck am I doing now? So, and the what the fuck am I doing now is the unsafe part, right? And so we're having talent problems in every vertical and for sure in the unsafe job. So that's one. Two, procurement. Like, can you really procure new equipment, robotic equipment, drone equipment, data analytics equipment, AI to do dynamic pathfinding for you? Can you procure that in a public context? God, no. That's exactly what we've seen from the other sectors that I was just referencing. So you're really not getting any and all of that. And so then we have companies like Palantir, who actually with governmental bodies, with defense, they brought that technology in as a private contractor. What if that's the future of disaster response? Is that there is an awesome founding team out there that wants to save the built world with us, hopefully, to bring technology into private firefighting contracting and helping us almost stay, not just competitive, almost keep the built world alive by keeping fires contained, by adopting technology.
It's a very profound and bold suggestion. I think the I guess what would you say to a very conservative response to say, hey, you know what, it's a public good,
Yeah.
a fire potentially puts everyone at risk, etc., etc. We
Right.
can't be beholden to corporate greed or profit making or profit maximization on how the firefighting force does its job.
I think it's a valid question, but I'm not even sure if it's timely or like it seems out of place because that ship has sailed in all the other sectors already. Why would we draw that line now at the what is more pressing than wars and fires?
Yeah,
In wars that ship has already sailed. It's very evident. And so why would we now say, hey, hold on, let's have the Amazon burn down, but let's have a conversation where that actually makes sense to mobilize all forces to
yeah,
fight the fire. I'm not sure that.
yeah,
I'm not saying that's not what's going to happen. I'm just saying I'm not sure that's making sense.
yeah. And um, I know this may be early, and I think you already also put some thoughts into this into your latest AECVC post. So, for founders, perhaps thinking of such an opportunity, right? What sort of revenue or profit pools could they be thinking of accessing?
I mean, if I was a founder, if I was good enough to be a founder, then you could take my word to the bank, maybe. But here I would say tread with caution. So this is an investor thinking about how to found a company. At most likely, it's going to be wrong. But what does come to mind is like 3 or 4 revenue streams that I would find valid for exploration.
Mm-hmm.
One would be subscription services. I think that's something that has been evidenced by private military contractors, but also by Palantir, for example, as parts of their offering, where actually subscription services do work with governments.
Mm-hmm.
Secondly, I think pay per response, basically, where you get. In construction, we're calling this projects. I guess that's the same here.
Yeah.
So I think that's potentially aligned with what the governmental body would be willing to go with,
Mm-hmm.
again, to be explored. I think there's that. Potentially equipment sales, similar to what an Undural Industries
Mm-hmm.
would be doing. I think
Yeah.
that's, and that comes with maintenance components. So there's that
Yeah.
level of recurring is potentially baked into it. and
Mm-hmm.
maybe some training or similar components. I think there's enough value pools that could be transferred into revenue streams to be explored. But I mean, it's not much more than just a thought in my mind right now.
And so I have a hypothesis for the answer to what I'm about to ask, but would love to get your perspective.
Oh,
I think a lot of
pass fail test.
so I think admittedly they're not as many as there should be, but the few startups we do get about solving the wildfire problems, um, usually they end up taking a very different sort of approach. Either it employs IoT or some sort of detection sort of a
Right.
method, right? Or some other such method which is kind of more on a trying to solve the problem via passive monitoring. How would you compare, again, putting myself to the best effort I can, again, not adequately, of course, but if I were to be a founder and compare, hey, why not go this route of IoT, technology, etc., seems more tech and seems like not as much hassle versus this much more crazy idea or audacious idea of a private firefighting force. How would you compare these two opportunities?
So I think the fear of the sales motion shouldn't hold you back from making the big swing work. And by big swing, I mean fixing the wildfires and monetizing that value, right?
Mhm.
So if just because you think the sales motion to a municipal body, to governmental body is too difficult, and that's why I'm going to retreat to a slice of it, like IoT, I think that would be a quite bad logic, and it would yield in not only a suboptimal outcome, it might actually yield in no company or no revenue at all. Why? Because
Mhm.
I think one of the central problems of all the sectors that we mentioned, space, healthcare, defense, potentially disaster response, is that the procurement is extremely slow. That will apply to you whether you're building IoT or whether you're offering actually private firefighting
Yeah,
solution, right? But so if you're investing all this time into selling something, might just well do it for the big AOV and not the small AOV. So that would be one natural inclination that I have. But you're right. I mean, you need to definitely be capitalized to have the patience to go through that sales motion. Otherwise, you shouldn't start any of that.
yeah,
Neither the IoT nor the big swing.
yeah.
What's your answer?
I would largely be in agreement with you. I think so. There's also somewhat similar to how we look at what sort of models suit in certain markets. So, for example, what we have found in many emerging markets is very core infrastructure, very basic supply chain related problems are the bigger needs of the market. Whereas in Western markets, for example, it's more software, AI led. I would argue that this problem is one where the underlying infrastructure and the underlying rails of deployment, if you will, are not working as effectively as they should. So even if you add pieces of software or pieces of IoT on top, you get very marginal improvements. You're not really solving the fundamental problem. And therefore,
Right.
this is one of those things where you need to fundamentally rewrite the supply chain slash infrastructure, depending on how you define it.
I agree. Because
Yeah.
if you look, I mean, if you project this, right? So we're already having slow procurement. Fast forward 10 years of lack of talent pipeline. So in 10 years, you will still have slow procurement and you will
Hmm.
have less people to procure and less people to actually wildfire. So are they going to buy
Yeah.
your sensors? Just to pick on that example. So
Yeah.
that's just not the first principle here. The first
Yeah.
principle here is that the actual force doing that needs to be integrated with technology, and it's not going to work by going through difficult procurement and then difficult integration with the governmental body, and then on top of that, difficult training. Go
Yeah.
full stack all the way.
Agreed.
Well, that's a
Yeah.
neat mug you have there. Nice.
I know, right? Check out this cool logo. Like the
Nice.
quite a
Well done.
nice logo. Hey, but talking about models that actually solve real problems and other models that just create the illusion of trying to solve problems. right? I guess we have some spicy thoughts on climate investing.
Oh yeah, let me start with a few numbers actually. So I ran them this morning. So I'm going to list a few, but I'm going to contextualize them slowly, and then we can revisit. So let me give you a few benchmarks first of sectors that have historically been I guess staples of venture funding and venture innovation. So vertical software, okay? So vertical software in 2022 raised about 50 billion US dollar, 50. Education tech in 2022 raised 8 billion US dollar.
Okay.
Construction and real estate tech raised 40 billion US dollar in 2022. So vertical SaaS 50, construction real estate 40, ed tech 8.
Okay.
And now climate tech in 2022
Mm-hmm.
raised 70 billion. 70.
Wow. Okay.
Okay. Now 2023 year to date, well, let me actually extrapolate what we're on pace for. So 2023 in climate investing will probably be at around 40 billion. So there's a clear dip to 2022. But that's where we're on pace for is 40. Vertical SaaS, we're on pace for 25.
Okay. Quite a bit.
Education tech, we're on pace for again 7 around,
Okay.
and then construction real estate on pace for about 15 to 17. I
Okay.
forgot to mention marketplaces. Marketplaces was also last year 37, and then on pace this year around 25. So
Oh,
the point is, climate tech is outpacing all of these stapled sectors of venture funding by
mhm.
40, 50%.
On one hand, someone may listen to what you just said and said, hey, but isn't it the most imminent threat or the most imminent problem that we need to solve through all the money you have? So what do you got to say to that?
Can you really accelerate science by throwing more money at it? That's one of the questions that I'm asking people.
Hmm.
And honestly, I'm not really getting a lot of good responses. I think people. Let's structure the climate tech world maybe in simple, tiles or mosaics, right? So I think there's science tech, and then there's non-science tech in climate tech.
Hmm.
Science tech would be material science, for example, or a new form of a heat pump that is way
Yeah.
more efficient. Okay, so that's science tech. That's rooted in physics and chemistry. And then
Hmm.
non-science climate tech is everything that makes the assessment of the world, the deployment of technologies, the management of the built world more efficient so that CO2 gets reduced, right? So is
Yeah.
this structure as a starter, does that make sense to you?
It does. Yep.
Okay, so let's now double click on the science tech part. Okay,
Hmm.
physics and chemistry. So within that, I see two tiles. There's breakthrough stuff and there's incremental stuff. I haven't run the numbers and I doubt anyone has the numbers, but my instinct is that for every breakthrough in this world that we have on the science tech side, you will have at least a million, if not a billion, incremental projects and R&D outcomes. And a breakthrough comes along every, I don't know, nowadays every 100 years, 50 years, depending on your worldview and how optimistic you want to be. Someone thought they had found a room temperature superconductor. That
Yeah.
would have been that. Turns out probably not, right?
Yeah.
And they have been looking for that room temperature superconductor for decades.
Yeah.
So now you're throwing more venture capital at the climate tech sector, where most of the impact is going to happen in the science tech, not the non-science tech. And within the science tech, everybody believes they have the breakthrough. But really what statistics tell me is that everybody is throwing money at incremental stuff. And by the
Hmm.
way, and then I'll let you go, Shub. So I dealt a lot with power storage, energy storage in general, power storage and heat storage from 2010 to 2015. I can't tell you how many snakes oil salesmen I had to meet back then that told me that zinc air batteries, for example, was going to kill lithium ion batteries
Yeah.
on round trip efficiency and on basically per kilowatt hour cost. Of course it didn't. Every physicist could tell, or every chemist could tell you that's never going to happen. But still, these people got a lot of funding. And so
Yeah.
not only, so that's my point, not only are they not in the breakthrough category of science tech, they are even within the incremental category, the ones that can't even make an incremental improvement
Yeah.
work. But we justify throwing money at them just because, oh, let's see what happens. Well, every scientist can already tell you what happens.
Yeah.
So, and then I'll really let you go. I'm not advocating for not doing climate investing. I'm advocating for having it done by people with science backgrounds. That's my point.
Yeah. I mean, I just think, on one hand, I agree with a lot of people who say that given the state of affairs and the nature of the problem, we need to put money to work. But then I feel it's almost hypocritical to put it to work in very superfluous stuff where the development cycle is, in the best cases, mind you, many, many years away, or superficial stuff, which is, I think you had an interesting statistic, Patrick, or not statistic, but a relative comparison on carbon accounting, for example. Maybe you'd like to share
I
that.
mean, yeah, that's something that an investor I respect a lot, who's great at macro, told me, is that they believed it's like multi-billion-billion-dollar fund, been around for, I don't know, decades. And so that person told me, hey, we actually realized that there was more funding that went into carbon accounting software than there's market size.
Yeah. So that's really something, right? So I think, um, I mean, imagine put if you were to be the most passionate climate investor, right? Do you really believe putting enormous amounts of money behind carbon accounting is really the way to go to solve the climate problem? I agree to the extent that it plays a role, but perhaps there's other things that need to happen or be solved for before climate accounting becomes a more meaningful solution as part of the
Great
to
point.
solve the problem. And I
It's a
wonder
great
if
point. But hey,
those solutions which need to be solved for before are either being ignored or it's not the greatest story from a fundraising or capital raising point of view.
yeah, perhaps. And but that's what happens when you give people like you and me. I mean, you're actually a scientist. I'm not, okay? But so
A
if you
scientist,
give, well, I mean, engineer, okay, chemical engineer, but it falls into the mint category. Yes, you're right, but not
let's
like a
go with it.
researcher. Yeah, but not a researcher. But that happens when you give VCs that have been trained to find zero marginal cost businesses and how to scale those, and you equip them with tens of billions of dollars to do the same in the climate category. Well, what do you think will happen? They will hunt the same type of business, carbon accounting software, or they will put their money basically not understanding necessarily what the real scientist is understanding about the science tech categories
Yeah,
in this space. And then they say, yeah, but I have all these advisors. I'm sorry, it's not the same.
yeah, yeah. But by the way, I mean,
70 billion last year. And I would love to see the number. How much of that 70 billion was managed by physicists and chemists? I would love to know that. I have a feeling it's minuscule.
by the way, a bit of a tangent, but I think still maybe not too off topic on the climate investing theme. Have you heard of this company, Windfast?
Oh, the Vietnamese car manufacturer, electric car manufacturer,
Correct.
right?
Did you know that recently it briefly went up to almost 200 billion in valuation?
I did. I did. I think the owner still retains north of 90% of the company in ownership.
Something like that. Yeah. Anyway, I thought that was um, crazy by all definitions. Yeah,
Don't get me started on the e-mobility and grid extension topics.
yeah,
I mean, mankind is really awesome in just resisting a certain topic and then overshooting on it.
yeah,
Like for,
yeah.
for 70 years we didn't want e-mobility, and now we're going so far that we're going to kill all grids, and we're going
Uh-huh.
to wow, okay.
I mean, what I would really love to see is, in the name of climate investing, backing very ground up infrastructure or real stuff which actually delivers tangible value, not because someone is monitoring something or something is being measured on the side, right? Or something is on a 10-year R&D cycle, for example. I mean, for example, the stuff that our portfolio firm Enter, which obviously you led the investment,
Yep.
Patrick. I think stuff like that. It's very, it's a very actionable and deliverable form of climate investing. I would
So
say.
that brings me to a different point I wanted to raise in this, right? And so I'm gonna tell you what Enter is doing in a minute. But the topic I'm gonna take this for is, I think there's more capital, 70 billion in VC last year, than there's good assets to throw it. And actually, in
Yeah.
2023, I just anecdotally, by the amount, by the conversations that I'm having with climate investor friends, and there's no shortage of them. I'm getting the feeling they realize exactly that, is that they have too much money on 10, 12-year fund life cycles, and there's just not enough good assets to go around. You can always say that about VC, but it's the shortage is much more, or the discrepancy, the disproportion between capital available and good assets is stark
Yeah.
in the climate category. And so Enter falls into the awesome assets, in my opinion. So what they are doing, and what I've grown to love so much, is that they go into real estate, B2B, B2C, any kind of asset class possible, and they take what's called an energy audit. So you have so I come from the energy world, and I thought about this I worked on this for like almost 20 years, right? And so there's three types of data that you can have about the carbon footprint of any type of building. There's physical substance of the building. There
Mm-hmm.
is the energy consumption, that is, electricity, heat, water. And then finally, there is the load curves of the technical equipment, be it your heat pump or whatever. So that's three types of data: physical substance, energy consumption, and the load curves. And
Yeah.
so there's a shit ton of companies that do the second type, right? And from
Mm-hmm.
all vectors, like from the utility space, from the energy space, from the API space, from the carbon accounting space, everybody goes after the energy consumption. Why? Because it's the low-hanging fruit. You already have utility bills. I can log into the online portal, let me API that, blah, 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 blah. But it still doesn't tell you how the fuck I actually make my building more carbon efficient.
Yeah.
Nothing. So can you get into the load curves? Yes, but that's OEM territory. That's the same as saying, hey, I'm going to hack into the bus system of a car manufacturer's car.
Mm-hmm.
No. Or my iPhone's firmware. Sorry, that's hardware territory. That's going to
Yeah.
belong to Fissmann, Siemens, Carrier, and all the like. So you're not going
Yeah.
to get into that. And by the way, you can't even optimize the load curve beyond generic load curves without knowing the individual physical substance of the building. So that brings me to that point. That's what Enter is doing. So they completely take the physical substance of a building in a super streamlined and repeatable way. And then based on that, they're building the merit order of effects or of upgrade measures that the building should take in order to have the maximum carbon reduction effect. And so that's what I love so much, is that they go after the right category, and then they sit in the spot with the building owner, asset owner, portfolio owner, where they have the trust, and they can do the
Mm-hmm.
curation. They are the credible arbitrator, because they don't install, they don't sell equipment, they don't sell maintenance, nothing of that. They have no
Yeah.
conflict of interest. They're the credible arbitrator that can make the best merit order recommendations on what to do. And hey, I mean,
Yeah.
20 million buildings just in Germany need upgrade. That's just
Yeah.
Germany.
Yeah. I think it's a tremendous opportunity and a tremendous firm. I think we definitely need more of such models and that sort of approach in climate investing or
Yeah.
climate startups. I would argue.
But of course, we can keep funding more of those that go after the energy consumption and have more APIs.
Hey, I mean, I think you need to get on that bandwagon, man.
I know.
You
I'm late to the
need to
party.
get us some of those API type solutions.
Yeah. What I really love, by the way, I mean, obviously we're venture people, but like I envy the position of the hardware manufacturers in this, because they really get to have a very good get to play a very good role in all of this, and that's the heating system manufacturers, but also the building automation system manufacturers like Schneider or like Siemens. They have very strong roles in this, and similar to, I think it's similar to how Apple will not get, or Apple has a lot of opportunity because they own the hardware. I see a similarity there.
Nice. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, you got to find us that next hot carbon accounting company.
I'll
from
get us
India.
into all of them. Right? I'll get us into all of them. Because that's how I do climate investing.
Nice. So in case it wasn't clear, I wish I had become a scientist. Probably was never in the cards for me. But my point is, just give the scientists the money and let them handle it. Don't pretend like and it's in the end you're just sifting off fees. It's
Yeah. I agree.
Cool. So I guess as always, Shub, what's in your calendar that you're looking forward to next week?
I think outside of opportunities that I've discussed previously, I think there's another interesting opportunity perhaps on, um, I guess, organizing the construction and the fit outs and finishing and post handover services for retail stores. Um, it's quite a mouthful, and I acknowledge it's not the easiest to summarize. I find it could be an intriguing opportunity. I think something perhaps. In fact, we haven't discussed it on Practical Nerds, but I think an intriguing topic, which has really occupied my mind, is on how you can potentially own an asset class which could be highly niche, and then just utterly dominate that asset class. Um, and there's obviously specific examples of companies which are surprisingly large, and I'm curious to dig in and learn more about this space, learn more about this use case, to see if there could be such an opportunity with retail stores.
Is that like common in your part of the world, in I guess Asia first and foremost, that when a building gets handed over, it's basically like bare naked, and whoever
Yeah.
takes it over, they have to fit it out?
Yeah, it's like a raw structure. So imagine something which has that. I think all of us are familiar with that dull gray looking color of cement, which is not finished over. So you get a structure which has a ton of that sort of color about it,
Okay,
and then
I
it's
see.
left to someone else to put the electrical, put all the HVAC, put the finishing materials on top, the ceramic stuff that comes on as well.
So just to be
Uh,
clear, that's what the tenant is getting, right? So it's not like, the general contractor does it later. No, that's literally where the general contractor
So
stops.
the ordinary tenant, that's what they will get, right? Unless of course there's someone again who's subletting or something of that sort. But by default, that's where the builder will stop at that sort of raw structure.
Fascinating. Yeah, I knew this from China, but wasn't aware that that's the case actually in many Asian places.
Yeah.
It sounds very cool. I'm looking at my calendar. So I've met a few like space construction companies, but nothing
Mhm.
ever clicked. A lot of it was fancy. But next week I'm meeting a company that actually is pitching to construct structures in space. So basically,
Wow. Okay.
SpaceX's pitch was, hey, if you don't reuse the rocket, it's too expensive to bring stuff into space. So these
Mhm.
guys go a step further. They say, don't even bring this stuff into space. We just construct it in space, right? So
Nice.
that's
It's
pretty intriguing.
it's out there, pun intended.
Oh, nice. Well done. Well done. Yeah, yeah. I'm a big fan of the show For All Mankind, so I don't know. I wouldn't call myself a space nerd. I think that there's people that deserve that label more than me, but it kind of fits my recent
I think
show
this is one
behavior.
of those things which I think if they pull it off, and I think VCs are guilty of throwing around words like this a bit too much. But I think something like this, if it clicks, it truly is transformative in so many ways. It introduces so many new possibilities of what we could be doing in terms of our ambitions in space exploration and
Right.
building stuff, etc.
Right. I have no idea yet of the funding environment, especially for like the next 10 years or so. So that's something I got to look into. You don't want to miss the right timing.
Yeah, that's true.
As in, you don't want to be too early.
Yeah. You mean like the climate investors?
Yeah, I have a feeling they have for themselves the right timing. Nice.
Nice.
Made a lot of friends today.
I'm sure. I think all our friends, the AI world and the climate world, we've all stacked them in the same place.
Yeah. Yeah.
Nice.
Have you seen an AI climate company recently?
AI climate company. I want to say I have, but I'm afraid I haven't because I imagine if a lot of my friends would love that.
So I
A lot
think
of my
I've seen a few in terms of like the data analytics.
uh-huh.
So if I throw Gen AI meets
Uh-huh.
climate in there, then I would probably have to think a little.
Okay,
Yeah.
I see.
So if you're building that, I want to hear from you.
Yeah, you could consider me as an afterthought as well.
Okay, nice. Then let me do that and wish you a wonderful weekend.
I wish you a wonderful weekend as well, sir.
See you soon, John. Ciao.